So, today on this weekly reset, we've gotten a pretty important set of changes because we entered the phase 2 of the Midnight Beta. This is the phase where we have Mythic Plus testable, as well as soon, starting this evening, the raid also testable, because with the introduction, of course, of the max level 90 server for you to test max level characters, the new tier sets, all of the apex talents, etc, etc. So we've gotten, as a result, also a bunch of improvements or additions to the base UI of the game. First of all, the damage meter is now in the game. We've gotten changes to the Cooldown Manager and the nameplates, as well as the added supposedly new party and raid frames for you to test. Since you are testing the raid and Mythic Plus, those were pretty important to be looking at. So, problem with this testing is that the situation right now looks pretty dire in how things are shaping up. It's pretty concerning that we have gotten just a few days ago the announcement that this was planned to come out the next expansion in the last Titan, but things were looking so good, things were going so fast, according to Eon, that it was worth shortening the release date by a couple of years to get these new base UI features in the game at the cost of removing our in-game add-ons. And right now things are looking pretty rough. The new party and raid frames, as expected, are looking pretty bad, as you still have zero customization in them. You can see from these clips that you start out at least with Blizzard giving you the option to hide permanent raid buffs or permanent debuffs, like the Challenger's Peril debuff for entering a Mythic Plus key, or even your Sated debuff for Bloodlust. At least now, thank God, doesn't show up in the frames. But beyond that, you don't really have a way to sort of edit anything else about these frames. These frames are now live, and if you go into the edit mode and you wonder about the party frames, this is all you get to change. So the party frame width and height, that's just the size of the frames, and then of course using the raid style frames. And then if you want to use it, the horizontal layout, and how do you want to group them, role, alphabetical, etc. And then if you want the template, that's the major change we have gotten now. The only one you can choose is if you want the legacy template, if you want the buffs at the top instead of the bottom, and then if you want the buffs on the right. So the buffs go here and the debuffs go here. You don't have any actual power on what to do with any of the icons in your frames. So this is the first take when it comes to your frames. It'll be fun to see later this evening and the following days when you test the raid frames, how horrible this will feel for healers as they try to navigate their multiple HOTS, for example, the poor resto druids having to try to play with this kind of frames in a raid. The other thing, as you can see from these clips, has been the horribleness of the nameplates. Nameplates, even with whatever addition they added, are still looking very, very poor right now. Honestly, amongst the other problems of the nameplates, the things that players have gotten more, distracted by is the option of the stacking nameplates, which doesn't really work. The stack nameplates, you can try to use stack nameplates for enemies, but they just slip away. It's like they're all greasy and trying to hug each other. They keep slipping away and slithering away from the side of the screen constantly, so it doesn't even work properly. All of the nameplates pretty much just stack together. But even if you assume a world where the stacking nameplates issue gets fixed, you're still stuck in the problem of really not having any ways of customizing the nameplates. As mentioned, still the biggest problem of nameplates is the inability for you to filter any of the useless debuffs you might not care about. For example, the good example in these clips, playing a Shadow Priest, would be showing both Shadow War Pain and Vampiric Touch on enemies. Considering you are playing right now with a version of Priest that cannot even physically put Shadow War Pain by itself on enemies, because if you play with Misery, Shadow War Pain is applied by default with Vampiric Touch, and then you have Tentacle Slam, which applies both Vampiric Touch and Shadow War Pain. Which means in any and all situations, if a Shadow War Pain is on an enemy, there will always also be a Vampiric Touch. Meaning you don't need to see two of them. One is enough. But you can't choose to filter away one of the two. So that's an extra icon on one of the plays, which of course when you're pulling 8 mobs, 9 mobs, 10 mobs, it becomes pretty pretty sizable to just clutter your screen that you cannot really choose to edit, to hide. The other problems still are the cast bars. Of course, they are just harder to notice, especially when you can't color them differently. This is one of the things that Blizzard said they're not going to change. So unfortunately, being able to change both the color of the cast bars as well as the color of the nameplates is something that is not really happening. But still, we should find somewhat of a middle ground between this, between what you can have right now in live, which is Plater, and all of these options. This is a single page of options of one of the 15 pages of Plater for customizing your nameplates, and a single page of Plater has more options than this, which is the entirety of the options available to you right now to your nameplates. So we need to find a middle ground between those two. Now, it is very likely that Blizzard will simply give up and let Addons take the slack once more. For example, right now in the beta, you already have the ability to use some addons like Platinator right now. It's the closest thing you can have to customizing your frames. But of course, the options are still very limited by what Blizzard allows you to do. For example, debuffs, right? Okay, fine. I can now choose to just move them here or move them here. Or Blizzard doesn't let me put them in front of the nameplates, for example, or doesn't let me put them like here. I can move them now, right? I can move things around, even the name. I can choose where do I want the name, right? So this is already more customization, for example, than Blizzard. So it's likely that you will just go and use this. You can also choose what you want to add. Do you want to add, for example, the glow on mouse over, right? Like this, obviously a bit more centered, right? Something like this. Now you have the glow on mouse over. So all of this is already miles better than what you can do with the default Blizzard UI. And it's even unlikely that the default Blizzard UI will be able to sort of top this in any way, pretty much. So that is what seems most likely, that we will have to once again have to default to using addons to fix this, because Blizzard simply won't add that many options in here in the default UI. You know, the idea of allowing you to have more than just 2 or 3 options in these categories is just not really gonna happen. So they will just let addons take the slack again. They will just be less customizable addons. Now, the other thing that came out was damage meter. Damage meter is horrendous right now. It barely functions. So you can have the damage meter for starters. This is the damage. If you reload your screen, if you just go away from your current screen for any reason, everything is lost. Whether it is relog, disconnect, or even just reloading the screen, or even for any second moving away from the game, you just lose everything. You just saved. It's gone. Now, as for the damage meter itself, you pretty much lose any kind of, you know, I guess interesting possible info you might have gotten from the damage meter. Here you can see the damage. First of all, you have to create 2 different windows just to get the DPS and the overall damage, or even the total damage done and your DPS, because they don't show up at the same time. That's whatever. The other thing is that if you check the damage, first of all, like completely clunky, you can't have your classic 2 windows next to each other, because you can create a second window, but then these spawn right next to it. You can't really choose, so which means they will always spawn in the middle of other things that will be quite annoying to check. And number 2, even if you do check the damage you've done, you can't see anything else. You can't just go further. You can't see who did you damage with this. You can't see the minimum damage, max damage, the damage on hits, the damage on crits. You can't check any of this. You know, if this was a Mythic Plus pool, this one wiped your group because you didn't die in time. You can't just go and check enemy damage taken, or simply do this and check how much damage did you do to this. There is no option to see anything here. This is just unclickable. Nothing works here. And of course, the more in-depth things, like checking, for example, auras to see your uptime of buffs, the amount of casts of certain abilities, you can see anything. So it's very bare bones, very basic. And this one we can't even say, oh, we will let addons take the slack, because you can't. with damage meters. You would have to be able to actually filter this information from the Blizzard API. Like, for example, the damage on the targets that you did, things that you cannot track right now, even if you were using Addons. So this would be what you're stuck with in-game. And the options are, again, embarrassing. If you look at the damage meter, these are your options. Again, similar classic things like frame width, height, the bar height, the padding, again, unable for you to remove the padding for whatever reason, opacity, and text size. Those are all the options. You can't even choose where you open the info window, so be wary of where you put this, because then you're going to spawn this in horrible positions. That's not something you can even edit right now from the damage meter. Even in this patch, in this phase 2 of the beta with the testable, testable Mythic Plus dungeons right now, we haven't really gotten any major reasonable additions to the Cooldown Manager. There haven't been really any news about this for now. And at this moment, just to point out the terrible state of the Cooldown Manager, it is so bad. Right now, the meta way to shape your UI is to literally go back to 2007 and use your action bars. One of the things complained about, for example, was being able to split this the way you want. So someone one day realized, hold on a second, I can choose to have my defensives and my cooldowns and my basic rotation abilities all spread nicely in their own categories, so I know where they all are, one next to each other, right? And then my offensive cooldowns as well, I can track them way more easily if I put them next to each other to see when they happen, right? And someone realized, well, those are just action bars. They can do the same job because the Cooldown Manager has such poor and few options. Then you can pretty much just use your action bars to do the same job of the Cooldown Manager. Because right now, the only thing you would be losing if you were to use action bars instead of the Cooldown Manager, when you go and look at the options of the Cooldown Manager, the only thing really for these bars is the alert, the sound alert for when they come off cooldown, for example. That's it. But then you would have to be deciding, okay, do I want the sound alert with the icon being here for fade? Or do I not care about the sound alert, but then I have the icon here? And this is better than having the sound alert with this thing at the bottom of this Cooldown Manager bars. So that's just how bad currently the Cooldown Manager is. Not allowing you to do this. Something that you can already do with your action bars. So this is something that I hope Blizzard will simply give up on. And as we touched on before, will simply allow you to create multiple bars, multiple sections of the Cooldown Manager, rather than forcing you to stay stuck with two, essential cooldowns and utility cooldowns. Just add more rows, just add more lines for you to create these so that you can put them where you want. Since you can already do it with your action bars, except the scuffed way, So let's just do it officially and put these options in the Cooldown Manager as well. But Cooldown Manager, even with this, it's actually the least of the problems right now. The nameplates are still the major one when it will come in Mythic Plus. You can see this. This was a key where, usual Mythic Plus title holders and MDI contenders were doing their autopilot huge pulls in Mythic Plus, and the result was, basically nearly unplayable, a complete mess. You can't even see what the enemies are doing in the midst of all of that. And what's the bigger problem when you're looking at this and trying to make any sense of it is the fact that another thing that was promised by Blizzard was that, don't worry, the reason why, or not the reason why, one of the consequences of losing an interrupt tracker, taking away the interrupt from healers, making your rotation simpler, also taking away a lot of your information that you can get from weak auras, from Plater, like the defensives active on players, the externals that can be active on players, the colored nameplates based on the type of enemy, the colored cast bars based on the type of cast, or if your interrupt is on cooldown. If we get rid of all of that, it means the dungeons, if we kept designing them the same as we do now, taking into account you have add-ons, of course it would be much harder. So in Midnight, if you lose all of these add-ons, we're also gonna make changes to the dungeons to accommodate for the fact that you're losing all of these add-ons and losing a lot of information in your keys. The first worry is that looking at these dungeons released yesterday, there is no change. The so-called bolt slop is still there. The so-called random barrage of single casts by enemies on players is still there. Multiple casting mobs in pretty much every pool, spamming, for example, frost bolts on players non-stop, is still there. There is like 1 per pack. You're pulling 3 packs at once. You will have 3 to 4 casters to deal with. Doesn't seem to have changed. Even worse, to have a confirmation of this, because, you know, if you look at Pit of Sauron, like this key, it has never been in Mythic Plus. So you don't perhaps have the exact same comparison of older times, because Pit of Sauron is a new one. But if you look at Agatha Academy, for example, there's been basically zero change on the type of mobs in the key compared to when it was active in Dragonflight. So where is this adjustment we have been hearing from Blizzard? This adjustment of the enemies, the type of enemies, the type of casts they have, etc., etc. It certainly doesn't seem like there's come when it comes to these Mythic Plus dungeons for now. Maybe we're still early on in the co-op department. Maybe this was just the early level development of Mythic Plus keys. Now they will be further adjusted to deal with the removal of our add-ons. But at least for now, there doesn't seem to be any of these changes Blizzard promised about just the way mobs, the way enemies will work in keys based on what we have lost in terms of knowledge, in terms of information that we could get from our add-ons. We will see also then later on today and this next few days when it comes to boss fights, raid boss fights, how they will have changed, accounting for the loss of our add-ons. But, you know, for now, we are still quite worried about all of these additions. Our default hopium scenario is that we won't see that many improvements from Blizzard themselves. They will just stop at the most basic form of basic UI options and then let add-ons once more allow you to customize the way you want. Still nowhere near the level of customization you had before, but many of these things to be as sort of free-flowing and modern won't be there by Blizzard, won't be put into the base UI, and you will have to do them through add-ons again. Obviously with much reduced, much fewer options compared to the add-ons you have now, because many of the hooks, many of the API hooks have been now hidden by Blizzard, so you won't be able to have the same amount of customization, but it feels like we will still have to rely on add-ons to deal with our nameplates and have way more options than the nameplates of Blizzard will offer, and same will go for the absolutely horrendous state we have right now of our party and raid frames when it comes to Mythic Plus and the raid. The only one that seems to be stuck into being actually terrible without likely that many improvements will be the damage meter, which right now is in a pretty dire state and seems like it won't really be improving by that much in the beta, in the future weeks of the beta. So this is the recap, the update of what has been added and what has changed in this new build of the beta when it comes to our base UI we will have to work with in the next expansion. So with this recap out of the way, we can now leave each other on this Wednesday. We can start by saying our goodbyes, by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, well, you know, maybe you can actually do it sometimes, although you would actually have to know what you're even talking about. I kind of lost track of what I was saying